Today is the day we're expecting to learn about the New Orleans Saints starting quarterback up against the Washington Commanders, but we may not. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at how the Saints need to go about trying to limit Washington Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels. Won't be easy, but there are some things the New Orleans Saints can do. I'll tell you what to expect. We're also going to dive into Washington's biggest weakness and how that could work very well in the New Orleans Saints' favor, especially at home. That, of course, being the run game. We'll lead everything off today with a look at the New Orleans Saints quarterback situation, which to this moment still has not been resolved or has not been announced, but there's a chance that we don't actually learn much of anything at all on Wednesday. I got that coming up for you today as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you as a new customer can get started with $150 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. So today was the day that we're supposed to be able to go to practice. We'll see who's throwing passes and then come out of that practice. And then soon after that, be able to announce to all of you who the starting quarterback may be for the New Orleans Saints. Remember, the Saints still have not officially ruled out Derek Carr, although the signing of veteran quarterback Ben DiNucci kind of lets you know that they're not necessarily expecting at this point that Derek Carr is going to be ready. But they were expected to make a decision Tuesday night on which of the young quarterbacks will get the bulk of reps over the course of Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But what if that ends up not being the case? I've been thinking about this possibility, this process of how the Saints could go about this. And one of the things that I thought to myself was, well, how did they go about it early on in the season? You remember, Haener has been QB2 behind Derek Carr and behind Spencer Rattler all season. But then when Derek Carr got hurt, they went to Spencer Rattler as the backup quarterback. Sometimes QB2 and then the next starting quarterback, right, are not necessarily the same. That's certainly what we saw earlier this season. The Saints could very well decide that they want to go with Haener. They got to look at Spencer Rattler. Seems fair to get a look at Haener. I still think getting another look at Spencer Rattler is worth their time as well. So they can't really go wrong here. So looking at the way that they managed this early on in the season, what did they do? Well, they had an active competition ongoing every day in practice, every day during training camp, every day leading into games, all those other things. And so that could be what they do this week. They could give Haener the bulk of snaps on Wednesday, today, then turn around and give Spencer Rattler the bulk of snaps on Thursday, tomorrow, and then Friday, whichever quarterback is going to start gets the bulk of the reps. So it could be that we don't actually know who the Saints are going to select until Friday. Now, we don't know that that's going to be the case. I'm not saying that that will be the case. I'm just introducing it as another possibility because the New Orleans Saints are clearly playing this very close to the chest, and they're playing this with a ton of gamesmanship, and that could be another way that they go about it. When I talk about the gamesmanship, by the way, I mean forcing your opposing team, the Washington Commanders, to potentially have to be ready for three different types of quarterbacks, because Derek Carr is not like Haener, who is also not like Spencer Rattler, and Spencer Rattler is not like Derek Carr. And so you have three very unique quarterbacks here. Derek Carr, Haener, probably the most akin to one another, but still very different in their play style when it comes to mobility, decision-making, speed, processing, pre-snap diagnosis. Like, they're all different in different ways for different reasons. Experience, inexperience, all these other things. Washington has to be prepared for all three of those guys. And so you could drag that on all throughout the week as opposed to making that announcement on Wednesday. Now, do I think that the Saints already know probably who's going to be the starter on Sunday? Yeah, I think they do. I think that they have an idea of who that's going to be. But in terms of what they show us at practice, well, it might not be much, right? It might not be much. We might walk in for practice on Wednesday, and instead of seeing quarterbacks throwing passes, we could be watching special teams drills, right? Like, they could do that. And so we'll see what we see. But we might not get a clear answer on who the starting quarterback is until Friday, because they might continue to do what they have done all season long, which is foster a competition between these two quarterbacks. Now, it will take you by no surprise that I think that they should at least give Spencer Rattler one more of the last 4 games. And I would say go ahead and do it now. And then you can give Jake Haener the rest of the season, or the rest of the games that Derek Carr may or may not miss. Because remember, Derek Carr went from being feared to be out for the season to all of a sudden being week to week. And so we'll see when and if he actually does make his return to the field this season. But the Saints have a lot of things that they kind of have to juggle in terms of that. The injury guarantee, his long-term health, his availability going into 2025. It's one thing to have to deal with the guaranteed injury, $30 million, because he's probably going to be your quarterback next year anyway. So eventually that money will guarantee, whether it's because of injury or it's because it's beyond the 3rd day of the league year next year. But it's another thing to guarantee that money to a quarterback that might have hurt his hand and then played too soon and then could potentially hurt his hand even more, that can't be a part of training camp or whatever, right? Like, you don't want that. Like, that's the worst case scenario, is that the injury gets worsened to a point where you're paying him to not play for you next year, right? Or at the beginning of next year, whatever it might be. So that's where I think some of the caution has to come in. But until at this moment, Saints make no plans on saying anything other than, yeah, Derek Carr could play. Yeah, we'll see. You know what I mean? And yeah, go ahead. Gamesmanship. I'm all about it, right? Play chess. Go ahead and play chess. And so I think that's what the Saints are doing. But I think that there's a chance they continue to play chess even when it comes to those younger quarterbacks and making that decision between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. So we'll see which direction they go. Looking at what the Washington Commanders defense presents, it almost feels like Jake Haener might actually be a better fit up against them, up against Washington. It's not the strongest secondary. It's a secondary that reacts a little bit. That, like, if you have a guy that is able to quickly diagnose and get the ball out and process quickly and all those other things, which we've seen Jake Haener be very decisive and read through quickly and all these other things, that's a good fit. But then the addition of Marshawn Lattimore changes the dynamic of that, right? Because now Marshawn Lattimore, of course, former New Orleans Saint who was traded away to the Washington Commanders at the trade deadline, is expected to make his debut this weekend against the very New Orleans Saints that traded him away just weeks ago. So does that change what that secondary looks like? The good news for the Saints is that where the Commanders struggle the most takes a lot of pressure off of either one of those young quarterbacks, and it's against the run. So what I would look at here is how the run game ends up impacting this decision. Does the fact that Washington's weak against the run mean that the game is actually better tied for Spencer Rattler than it is for Jake Haener, a guy that might be looking to be a little bit more mobile, use his legs a little bit more, which is what he told me he wanted to do the next time that he got his opportunity to start? And does that mean that instead of what would be at first glance a very good fit for Haener becomes a very good fit for Spencer Rattler? These are all the things that the New Orleans Saints are going to have to juggle. But I will tell you this, if the Washington Commanders are weak at anything, it's stopping the run. And so let's transition our conversation about why that's important for the quarterbacks and take a look at why it's important for guys like Alvin Kamara and Kendre Miller this weekend. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Built Rewards. Now, if you're a renter, listen up, because this is about to be a total game changer for you. Built Rewards gives you points for paying your rent. So those points that you usually get when you travel or on groceries and things like that, you can now get on the rent you're already paying every month. It's awesome. This is what I love about Built Rewards. You can then use those points for things like travel, hotel stays. They've got over 500 airlines, over 700,000 hotels in their program. You can even use the points for future rent payments as well and access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. I love the Built Rewards program because look, if I'm going to be paying rent anyway, I might as well make rent work for me for a change. So start earning your points on the rent that you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. Make sure you use our URL so that they know that we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning points on your rent today. All right, family, if the New Orleans Saints want to get a big-time upset against the Washington Commanders, it's going to have to happen through their run game. If the New Orleans Saints cannot successfully run the football, they will be toast in this matchup going up against the Commanders. And actually, this matchup works pretty well for New Orleans in this case. Think back to a couple weeks ago up against their game against the Los Angeles Rams. In the first quarter, the Saints dominated time of possession in that game, holding the Los Angeles Rams to just over a minute of time of possession, allowing them to only run 3 plays over on offense. And the Saints took the rest of that quarter up, keeping the ball in their hands, but not necessarily being able to turn them into the points that they were looking for. Remember, the Saints actually shut out Sean McVay's offense for the first time ever in a regular season game in the first half, but only had 6 points themselves going in. So the Saints are going to have to be able to produce points, and the best way they're going to be able to do it in this game early is by controlling the clock and controlling the run game. Doesn't mean that they can only score touchdowns via the run, but they're going to have to put themselves in striking distance and in advantageous situations, utilizing their run game, not being penalized in the process, which they've had a little bit of a bad habit of here recently in terms of stalled drives and things like that. So got to get those things fixed. But if they can get back to running the football as successfully as they have shown that they can this season, they did it against the Washington Commanders, the Cleveland Browns. They did a good job of it up against Atlanta. You look back to early in the season when they opened the year up against Carolina, when they followed up with the big win over in Dallas, it was the run game the entire way that led those games. The Saints will need that again up against the Washington Commanders, but they're going to have to get it in a different way than they have found the success in the recent past. They're going to have to get it with their traditional running backs. They're going to have to do it with Alvin Kamara and with Kendre Miller. There is no Taysom Hill to come out here and help them out and help them with the run game. Taysom Hill season is over with the ACL damage plus additional knee damage, which is always a really scary thing to hear when you hear about a knee injury. So big things to watch in the offseason when it comes to Taysom Hill, I fear. So you don't have Taysom Hill to come and save you. You don't have Taysom Hill to come in and produce and give you that quarterback run game and all that. Maybe another reason why the game maybe leans a little bit more towards Spencer Rattler in terms of a matchup situation is because of the fact that you might be able to do that. Although Jake Haener can run too, but I don't know if you're going to be able to run the designed runs with him that you could run with Spencer Rattler. We'll see which way they go there. But what the Saints are really going to have to do is win this run game with Alvin Kamara and Kendre Miller. When it comes down to those two running backs, we saw the way that complement could work a little bit last week. They weren't super successful on the ground from a yards per carry perspective or from a total rushing yardage perspective, but you could see the complement in the game plan. Alvin Kamara being able to run a lot outside, but also move back inside. And then, of course, everything that you're able to do with Kendre Miller as somebody that can give you that power run up the middle, but that also has shown the ability to be able to show you a little bit of finesse as well when it comes to what he's able to bring to your offense. So I think for the Saints, that's something that they should continue to build their game off of as best as they can over the course of these next few weeks while they have both Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara available to them in this situation. So for the Saints, who typically run a ton on the outside, they lead the NFL in outside runs going into this week and did going into last week as well. They were number one with over 70% of their runs going to the outside. Right now, they're number one with 69.9% of their runs going outside, which is nice. So there's like ways that you can see that the Saints would be able to take advantage of this. But if you look at last week, when it came to their run percentage, they ran only 66% of the time towards the outside because of the amount they were able to now run back inside with Kendre Miller. So he did add that element back to the offense, even without Taysom Hill being there. You would see a larger disparity in weeks where Taysom Hill was not available in terms of what went outside versus what went inside. So a little bit more ability to be able to kind of vary things up a little bit. Now, when we look at what the Washington Commanders defense has struggled against so far this season, it has been the run game. They're 27th ranked against the run, and that works pretty well in terms of matching up for New Orleans and what it is that they want to be able to do up against this defense. Now, when it comes to outside versus inside runs, the Commanders are 12th in the NFL when it comes to defending outside runs, allowing 72.7 yards per game in that metric. But more importantly, they allow 5.6 yards per carry on runs that go outside the tackles. That's a really good scenario for New Orleans and something that matches pretty well with what it is that they want to do. Meanwhile, they're allowing only 4.3 yards per carry on runs going inside the tackles. Not excellent, don't get me wrong, still something you'll be able to take advantage of and matches up well for Kendre Miller, but a little bit more success they're giving up to opposing teams when running outside the tackles. On a per game basis, they are the Washington Commanders, allowing the 5th most rushing yards between the tackles of any team in the NFL. So here's your opportunity to be able to take advantage of that, right? This is what we needed to see the Saints do last week up against the New York Giants too, and they failed to do it well. Why? The offensive line absolutely got bullied, by backup defensive tackles and all these other things. So the Saints really need a rebound game on the offensive line in the run game here up against Washington, which has some talented players on the defensive line, don't get me wrong, but still is one that your starting offensive line, which the New Orleans Saints, at least until we see practice later on today, look like they're going to be healthy again going into this week. Remember, the Saints just played their first game with all 5 starters in their offensive line since week 3 last week in New York or in New Jersey going up against the Giants. Can they get their offensive line back on the field this week? And can they produce at a higher rate and produce at a better rate this week than they did last week? That's going to be a big piece to watch over the course of the week in terms of their health. And then, of course, going into the game is an offensive line that was excellent against the pass rush last weekend up against the Giants, allowing only 6 pressures on that game, according to Pro Football Focus. Can they get on the right side of the margin when it comes to the run game and producing there as well? Because again, if the New Orleans Saints want to pull off an upset, and this would be an upset at home, beating the Washington Commanders, they're 7-point underdogs, according to our friends over at FanDuel at the time that I'm recording this. And so if they're going to come up with a big time upset, they'll need to do it with the run game. And beyond that, offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak has to prove that he can produce a run game without Taysom Hill. And this is going to be the big test this weekend going up against the Washington Commanders. So look for Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller, and potentially whichever of the 2 young quarterbacks that gets the start, if they do get the start, right? Because remember, Derek Carr could still go, apparently. We'll see what happens. Those 3, expect them to get a lot of attention in the run game coming forward. And maybe a little bit more Kevin Austin Jr. on jet sweeps too. I don't want to rule that out because we saw that a couple weeks ago. Maybe we start seeing that come back into the offense a little bit this week as well. So just a couple things to watch. But if the Saints are going to want to get a win this weekend, they're going to have to do it on the ground. Meanwhile, they're also going to have to do it on the defensive side by limiting one of the NFL's best quarterbacks and offensive rookie of the year candidate, favorite, however it is that you want to look at it, Jayden Daniels. How do they get it done? Well, not very easily, but there are some things that they can do. Let's break it down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ice Shakers. If you're like me, you're somebody that has been trying to get a little bit better at holiday shopping, and thanks to Ice Shaker, you are about to be a hit because right now they are officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, MLB, NBA, and NCAA, so you can now buy officially licensed Ice Shaker bottles as well. Not only do they look awesome, but they are also simply the best workout bottles that you're going to find, created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers. It's stainless steel on the inside, no wire ball on the inside as well. They have their own thing that breaks up the powders and stuff like that. The agitator at the top works as a strainer as well, so it makes for very solid tailgating cup for mixed drinks and all that too. I mean, this thing just has so many uses. So go and get yours today. You can order your team branded bottles at iceshaker.com and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for 25% off of your first order. That's Ice Shaker. Show your support for your favorite team by getting the best branded workout bottle in the game, Ice Shaker. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints need to get the run game going on the offensive side. But they're going to have to limit the run game of the Washington Commanders if they want to get a win this weekend. And the trickiest part about that is going to be limiting Jayden Daniels, the offensive rookie of the year favorite, the former LSU Tiger. A lot of you are very familiar with Jayden Daniels already and the incredible stuff they did at LSU. Well, he's doing it all over again here at the next level. The number 2 overall pick, looking like the guy that should have been the number 1 overall pick, is now coming to town to take on the New Orleans Saints. And a big part of the reason why the Washington Commanders have been so successful when it comes to Jayden Daniels is what he's able to do, not just through the air, but in the passing game as well. We're talking 17 passing touchdowns and just 6 interceptions. So he does take care of the football. But the Washington Commanders as a whole, as a passing team in that Cliff Kingsbury offense, 18th in the NFL when it comes to passing yards, 15th in the NFL when it comes to passing touchdowns. So they're right there in the middle of the road, not far removed from where the New Orleans Saints rank when it comes to that as well. However, where they separate themselves from the rest of the NFL is their ability to run the football. Number 3 in the NFL in rushing yards, number 3 in the NFL with 23 rushing touchdowns. Their top 2 rushers, running back Brian Robinson and quarterback Jayden Daniels, 640 yards, 590 rushing yards, respectively. Their top 2 scorers on the ground, 8 rushing touchdowns by Brian Robinson, leads the team. Right behind him, Jayden Daniels, 6 rushing touchdowns, is second in the team there. Only 2 of their players have over 100 rushing attempts, and those players are Brian Robinson and Jayden Daniels. So if you want to limit any piece of this offense, it's going to be that one. That's the piece that you have to limit when it comes to the Washington Commanders offense in order for you to put your team in position to stop or to potentially get a win. Here's the challenge for New Orleans. Number 1, they've been abysmal against the run. Number 2, they've been abysmal at stopping rushing quarterbacks. We saw the New Orleans Saints allow a lead rusher, Drew Lock, last weekend in New York because of their letting him, having those running lanes and things like that. You're not going to be able to surrender those rush lanes to Jayden Daniels. Now, I will say this. A lot of that is if you want anybody on the New York Giants to lead the team in rushing, let it be one of the quarterbacks. I don't blame the Saints for that at all. And actually, they did well going up against the running backs, allowing just over an average of 2.5 rushing yards when it came to the running back in New York. So the Saints did do a good job there. But when it comes to their overall season, this is where they've struggled. 26th in rushing touchdowns allowed, 25th in rushing yards allowed as well. That means amongst the most in the NFL. That's where they have ranked pretty poorly so far this season. However, they have only allowed 12 passing touchdowns so far this year. That's third best in the NFL, third fewest in the NFL. So if they can take away the scoring potential through the air and find a way to limit as best they can the run game, then all of a sudden the Saints defense could be in business. And if they come out looking like they did up against the Los Angeles Rams just a few weeks ago, but maintain that for 4 quarters, all of a sudden they put themselves in a better position. One of the big issues with New Orleans is that recently the defense in particular has started strong and finished strong, but has had a bit of a dip in those second and third quarters. One of the things Darren Rizzi always talks about is the second half, beginning of the second half in particular, looking at the first 2 offensive drives, first 2 defensive drives of the opening portion of the third quarter. And that's where a lot of things have not gone the way that the New Orleans Saints would like. They have to get over that hump this weekend because that's enough drives for you to come up scoreless and for them to score the football with a team that runs the football as well as they do to be able to hold on to that lead if they get it in that portion for the rest of the second half. So you can't let that happen in this game. So the biggest keys for New Orleans are going to be running the football, being stronger in the second and third quarters while maintaining their fast starts and strong finishes, and then limiting the run game of the Washington Commanders. Those are going to be the big things when we get to Crossover Thursday with David Harrison tomorrow that we're going to be diving into all throughout that episode as we dive into what's going to be the deciding factors for this matchup. And those are definitely going to be the deciding factors. For the Saints, when it comes to what they've allowed to quarterbacks as rushers, looking at the rushing yards that they've allowed so far to opposing quarterbacks, the Saints rank just outside the top 10. So they're actually doing pretty well there. Just 301 total yards. Compare that to the Cincinnati Bengals, who are at 416. That's where things are a little bit different. So the Saints have been doing okay there, but they are about to face their biggest challenge in that category. Did a good job, well enough job against Jalen Hurts earlier on this season. Now they'll get their opportunity to go up against Jayden Daniels. So this is going to be a big test for New Orleans. So how do they manage it? Well, it's going to be a lot of things that you hear this team talk about from their typical run game perspective. So the good news is that where New Orleans has kind of struggled when it comes to their run game aren't incurable things. We're not talking about a team that is all of a sudden dealing with stuff that they can't overcome and that they can't fix, they can't get better at, and all these other things. It's just, you're not going to see them completely flip a switch here this late in the season. If they were going to do that, they would have done that already. But you can get marginally better. And it's going to be gap integrity, right? It's going to be eye discipline, and expect the New Orleans Saints to deploy a little bit more of a mush rush in this game. And a part of that mush rush is going to be making sure that these players, that the pass rushers don't over pursue Jayden Daniels and then surrender escape lanes to him. So instead, you might see a defensive end push to get to a landmark and then just hand fight with that offensive lineman, not trying to over pursue or necessarily push to get the sack, but instead being ready in case Jayden Daniels tries to bail, they can shed off that block and get that stop. That's what I think you're going to see a lot of. So that means there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be looking like the pass rush isn't working, but it's going to be because of what the New Orleans Saints are actually trying to do when it comes to their pass rush, which is not give up those escape lanes to Jayden Daniels. So we might not see a game here that follows up on a big game from Chase Young, the former Washington Commander himself. By the way, a little bit of a revenge game for him. It's not just Marshawn Lattimore, but we might not see him follow up a career-tying 10 pressure game, according to Next Gen Stats. Pro Football Focus actually had him with 12 pressures up against the Giants. We might not see him follow up with that big of a game going up against the Washington Commanders, but that might be by design, not necessarily because he's losing battles, but because his difference is not necessarily looking at getting after the quarterback, but instead being there in waiting in case that quarterback tries to escape. Then once the quarterback starts to move around a little bit, then you're able to kind of pursue a little bit more. So that's going to be the big thing to be looking for next when it comes to that pass rush. Offensive tackle, left tackle for the Washington Commanders, Brandon Coleman, the rookie out of TCU, has been awesome so far this season. So that matchup with Chase Young is going to be really, really important to watch. It can go one of either ways. Either Brandon Coleman continues to play awesome, allowing the 10th lowest pressure percentage of left tackles in the NFL right now, or the veteran, wily, experienced guy that is Chase Young going up against a rookie. Going to go one way or another. So we'll see which way it all happens. But I think those are things you're going to see from the New Orleans Saints in trying to limit Jayden Daniels and that run game as best as possible. All right, y'all. Coming up tomorrow, crossover Thursday, David Harrison of Locked On Commanders will be here. We'll give you everything you need to know, including what the Saints need to do to win that game and even the enemy perspective on those things. So a little bit about what we discussed today, but a little bit more in depth tomorrow. We got that coming up for you, as well as what the Washington Commanders are going to be looking to do to get their win. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. Don't forget to go and make Locked On NFL your second listen of the day. And of course, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. They're not a family Zoom. Them how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.